Welcome to Mortification of Spin, a casual conversation about things that count, with Carl Trueman and Todd Pruitt, a podcast of the Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals. Let's join this week's conversation.
You are listening to Mortification of Spin. My name is Todd Pruitt. I'm with you as always. I'm the pastor of Covenant Presbyterian Church, a congregation of the Presbyterian Church in America. We're located in Harrisonburg, Virginia, and I'm joined as always by my friend and colleague and fierce competitor, Carl Trueman, who teaches at some school in the outer reaches of Western Pennsylvania, there on the very edge of the known world, where he regularly has to battle against marauding bands of troglodytic, zombies, that kind of thing. Isn't that kind of what goes on in Western Pennsylvania,
it is,
Carl?
Strange banjo-playing children who hang out in the woods, and all kinds of creepy stuff goes on.
That's what I thought.
It's kind of extension of Appalachia, which is
right.
Really
well, in a lot. Yeah, I mean, you're Rust Belt. You're Rust Belt out there, aren't you?
It is. Well, it's more agricultural actually, but it's very much like where I grew up in the UK. I grew up in farmland in the countryside. So,
well, there you go. So
to my roots.
So other than having lived in Philadelphia for a while, densely populated urban centers are not kind of your native territory. And the reason why I bring that up, because without getting into the details, I just want to put it out there that Carl was in was it the Dallas area recently?
Oh yes, I was in Dallas.
and Carl was facing the he ended up at the wrong house one night where he was headed.
I did.
And you ended up on the business side of a gun for a while from some angry resident.
I was held sort of hostage for about 20 minutes by a guy threatening to blow my brains out. I won't give you the exact phraseology he uses. It would not be repeatable on a family program. But
is that because he had read one of your books?
he read one of the books, and he was so angry and frustrated. It drove him nearly to murder. And so
seriously, it is interesting. I've always wondered, what would I feel if I thought I was about to die?
Well, you had that opportunity.
Now I know.
Yeah.
I remained weirdly calm. And the strange thing is I feel strangely untraumatized by it.
Well, you're English.
Telling the students with a laugh about it all week. I'm a sort of legend on campus now.
I guess.
But yeah, very nearly had to text the president from this driveway in Dallas and say, you might need somebody to teach my classes next week as I'm about to die.
In those moments, obviously, your thoughts would have run to your wife, your children, your granddaughter. At any point, was there a thought of me? Was there anything, I really need to ask Todd's forgiveness for anything?
No, I did think of you. And it was a kind of, I won't see Todd again, so there is an upside.
There's an upside for that. Well, that's good.
Was there ever a thought of you're going to miss out on that interview that was scheduled with Thaddeus Williams about his new book?
Who's Thad Williams?
All the world here.
I can tell you that Dr. Johnson's claim that, was it Dr. Johnson or G.K. Chester who said if a man knows he's about to be hanged in 30 minutes, it focuses his mind wonderfully.
Focuses the mind, yes.
My mind was very focused. And I also discovered that this kind of sports watch thing works, because later that night I went to look at the stress levels, found the 20-minute slot when I was being held at gunpoint, and
nice
stress level of 100%.
Burn some calories. It's all good.
Yeah,
that's like being on a Peloton for like 2 hours. So that's great.
Yeah, I must have burned a lot of calories.
Yeah. Well, let's use this helpful discussion as a segue into introducing our guest today. Actually, this is the second time that Thaddeus Williams has been with us. That is the professor of theology at Biola University in California. That's a whole nother discussion. We won't get into that today, but how people live there. But he's a return guest with us. Some of you will remember the interview we did with him several years ago on his excellent book dealing with issues of justice and how to understand those through a biblical lens. Well, his latest book is entitled "Don't Follow Your Heart: boldly breaking the 10 commandments of self-worship. I kind of like to refer to this as the really coherent and accessible and readable version of Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. And so we are indebted to Professor Williams for bringing us this book. Hey, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, my students describe it as Strange New World plus Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self, but interesting.
Oh, wow. That's outstanding. I think Carl referred to it earlier as the poor man's Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. So
the unthinking man's Rise.
The unthinking.
We're going to raise the stakes.
He described to me the book because he actually wrote the foreword. And in the foreword,
I did.
Says, this is the book I wish I wrote.
Man, that needs to be. In fact, would you get that like on a coffee mug or a t-shirt and send that to me?
It's done. Yeah, go to the website, better than riseandtriumph.com. Better than riseandtriumph.com.
I'd appreciate
the URL.
Outstanding. Well, listen, in all seriousness, what was the occasion for the book? Where does it come from?
It actually comes from, on the cover, there's a beautiful young lady who happens to be my daughter. One of my 3 daughters, Holland Williams, who we call Dutch for short. Mm-hmm. And for years and years, my wife and I have played Spot the Lie with the kids, whatever they're watching, whatever YouTube clip, whatever, Disney show. If they can spot a falsehood, explain why it's false, they get $1. And so this was going back 3 or 4 years ago. And Dutch comes leaping joyfully down the stairs. Daddy, you owe me another $1. What'd you find this time, darling? And she'd been watching a commercial for whatever, fairy, pixie, rainbow, princess, whatever. And she said, Dad, the commercial told me to follow my heart. I said, okay, well, spot the lie. And she said, and this is verbatim, it's like permanently filed away in the proud daddy moments in my memory. She said, Daddy, I don't want to follow my own heart. My heart is fallen. I'd way rather follow God's heart. Wow. And I just,
yeah, absolutely.
Wrapped my arms around her, and she got $5 for that one. Well-earned $5. Mm-hmm. And so that was really the inspiration, realizing just how countercultural it is to say, don't follow your heart these days, because the propaganda to obey your emotions under expressive individualism, this idea that I have a moral duty to be true to myself, is so ubiquitous that it really is pretty revolutionary, radically countercultural to say something like follow God's heart instead of our own. So that was the impetus for this book and what landed her a spot on the cover of the book.
That's good.
Now, like me, Thaddeus, you teach young people, sort of 18 to 22-year-olds. What do you think are the primary pathologies of that current? And let's be clear, of course, Biola and Grove City, they're not necessarily representative because they're both Christian colleges, universities. So the students are somewhat self-selecting, but they're not isolated or impervious to the wider culture. What would you identify as the key features of that 18 to 22-year-old age bracket that sure. we need to be aware of as we think about how to make the faith plausible and compelling to them?
Yeah, so with the shift from following God's heart to following your own heart comes an entire generation that's been raised on that propaganda, now bears the crushing weight of the creator-sized task of creating and sustaining an identity over time. That's a God-sized task. And when that's been heaped on the shoulders of a finite creature, I find crippling anxiety with many students, a deep sense of depression. There's a kind of existential angst, which is sort of the predictable result of erasing the creator-creature distinction and telling an 18-year-old now, go be true to yourself. Well, which self? Go follow your heart. Well, which part of my heart? And so I find along with that goes, I think one of the defining marks of Gen Z in my experience is taking themselves extremely seriously. Where I have a good friend at Talbot, a good mentor, JP Moreland. He's been a mentor and friend of mine for over 20 years. And our office doors are about a first down apart from each other in Talbot East. And I just bumped into him yesterday morning, actually. And his greeting is "Good morning, idiot." And we constantly razz each other. And I remember back in the day as a grad student, when he would call me idiot, I thought, like, man, like, what an insensitive jerk. And the more I got to know him, I realized that what he's up to there is actually something deeply biblical, that when we take God seriously, it frees us up from having to take ourselves all that seriously. And so his sort of morning liturgy is to remind people around them that they aren't the center point of existence. And so I try to do that as much as possible to have a countercultural impact on my students, remind them the universe doesn't revolve around them, remind them that their feelings aren't the sacred, authoritative standard of reality, but that actually what God says should be taken a lot more seriously, with the wisdom of G.K. Chesterton, right? That angels can fly because they take themselves so lightly.
It's interesting to me.
Those British people occasionally get things right, you know.
Well, they just have a way of putting things, and without the accent, though, I don't think they would be nearly as impressive. But even as you were saying that, and I had this thought a few days ago when I was reading a portion of your book. Also, is I wonder about the nexus between our tendency to take ourselves very seriously, the fact that my heart and what I feel matters supremely. If there's a nexus between that and what we're seeing now with the rise of the social cachet of victimhood and the enshrining of my feelings to the extent that what would never have been considered bullying 20 years ago, but just rather kind of common behavior, has now become something that could get you run out of town.
Sure. Yeah. And that again, sort of harkens back to the erasing of the creator-creature distinction under what in the book I describe as this cult of self. The self, it is a fully orbed religion. Expressive individualism has become a religion in a deep sense. It's got adherents and patron saints and prophets. So you got, 84% of Americans think that the meaning of life is to make yourself happy, right? So sort of inverting the Westminster Catechism, the chief end of man for this generation is to enjoy and glorify myself forever. You have 86% of Americans saying to live the happy life, do what you desire most, and 91% saying to find the answers, look within. And so now in this new religion, it has its own systematic theology. It has its own dogmatic substructure where the theology proper, the finite self, takes on all the roles traditionally held by the creator. And so now, in the same way that if I were to deny, let's say, the omnibenevolence of God or the sovereignty of God or something, I would be committing heresy because I'd be denying an essential attribute of God's identity. Well, once the self fills those God-sized shoes, if anybody out there dares question my identity, it's not just a finite human disagreeing with a fellow finite human and agreeing to disagree or anything like that. It's damnable heresy. It's blaspheming. You're transgressing against, what Arthur Leff, legal theorist and philosopher, called godlets. We've all become godlets. We're tiny little gods, and so anybody who doesn't celebrate my self-chosen identity is by definition heretical, who needs to be silenced. right?
Yeah.
It seems to me what you're describing there, Thaddeus, and indeed, I think this underpins a lot of the book, is we're really dealing with the way we imagine the world to be. That a lot of this is intuitive. It's not the result of somebody reading an argument and being compelled by the logic of an argument. It's to use the cliche, it's kind of the air that we breathe. And that seems to me to imply that the pastoral task or the apologetic task is complicated. Just sort of state the obvious. Right. How do we go about, one way of looking at what you've said, we'd say the thing is that people today, Christians and non-Christians, we're trapped within that Charles Taylor immanent frame. We think of everything in terms of this world. Even as Christians, we do that. Right. How do we I hear a lot of talk about re-enchantment. I'm not so persuaded that word really gets at what we need. How do we get a grasp of transcendence again? How do we recapture that sense of not only is the universe much bigger than me, but God is so much bigger than the universe? How do we make that? How do we form the imagination relative to that?
Yeah, I think we can sort of tear a page from the Old Testament prophets playbook here, where you read Psalm 115 is a good example, where in the ancient Near East, they're bowing down to these stone deities, these man-made, man-crafted, human-manufactured gods. And this is a running theme in the prophetic literature, a mockery, an expose of just how inadequate these man-made deities are. And so Psalm 115, you get statements like, they don't speak, they don't move. And then the psalmist draws the connection and says, those who make them become like them. Mm-hmm. You worship a rock, you're going to become as dumb as a rock, right? So there's something to exposing the idols of a given age in terms of how they fail to deliver on their promises. And so I argue that the argument kind of comes to a head in a little manifesto at the end of the book, where I say that this self-worship, it promises our most awesome life, but it actually robs us of awe. It markets itself as cutting edge, but it's hopelessly outdated. It harkens back to Genesis 3, literally the oldest lie in the book, that we can be like gods, crafting our own reality. Commands us to follow our hearts, but our hearts are divided and depraved. Encourages us to be true to ourselves and makes us unwitting devotees to miserable men and ideologues. Tells us to be our own moral masters, but strips us of courage and credibility. Calls us to the rush of unfettered experience and adventure, but really becomes impossibly dull, because if I'm the highest standard of reality and moral reality in my own meaning, that there's nothing bigger and above myself to be willing to live and if need be die for. So life becomes, instead of a vertical ascent, a hero's journey, it flattens everything out into this dull plateau of chasing my own subjectivity. Tells us the answers are within, that's where the problems are. Beckons us to be authentic, true to our emotions, but really if my emotions are sacred and unquestionable, I'm not authentic, I'm arrogant. Claims we can break the structure of reality, but reality breaks us back. And advertises itself as loving, but makes bigots and haters of us all. So the big point here to your question, Carl, is exposing just how inadequate the God of self is compared to the actual God. And so I do some work in the book showing that there's a shared human need to be awestruck. And there's a lot of science here that's catching up with the scripture, that when we're in a state of awe at something bigger than ourselves, we become, in the words of Paul Piff, a positive psychologist, we become more pro-social, less self-absorbed. Michelle Chioda out of Arizona State University found that when people are in a mental state of awe, they're less easy to dupe by fallacious arguments. So our cognitive faculties are sharper when we're in a state of awe. And so I argue that what the Old Testament would call yira, the fear of the Lord, reverence for God, awe for the Maker. Because of the creator-creature distinction, he's truly awesome. You could just run through his attributes. The fact that God is sovereign, enthroned, king of the universe, controlling supernovas and distant galaxies and every subatomic particle. The fact that God is triune, Father, Son, and Spirit. The fact that God is gracious and merciful. Now we meet the source of all that is awesome. And so to reach the next generation, I think it's convincing people what deep down they already know, that they aren't nearly as awesome as they like to think, and showing them a being who is truly worthy, who can truly scratch that existential itch that we all have to be truly awestruck.
If you had an opportunity to sit down with Christian parents, let's say you're invited to a church and you're given an hour, and in the room you've got Christian parents, you've got some children's ministry directors, you've got some youth pastors. Given that everything you warn about in this book is being taught to our children actively through every conceivable input all week, every day, they're being catechized every single day actively by the world in everything you're warning against.
Yep. Given
that, what would you say to that room full of interested, invested Christian people?
Yeah.
As here's what you would counsel them. Here's what I would counsel you to make as priorities.
Yeah.
For your children as you're guiding them, parents, sure. Children's ministry directors, youth pastors.
Yeah, easy question. In three words: buy my book. I should have known that. I should have realized that. And next question. That was an easy one. No, I would say it's important to form. Jamie Smith has done a lot of work on cultural liturgies and how self-worship. We have something as simple as online shopping can be a liturgy to inculcate habits of narcissism and my desires are what's really running the show. So I think it's important, and I explore in the book. At the end of every chapter, I have what's called a heretics field manual. Heretics in the sense of we are rebelling against, we are rejecting the dogmas of self-worship. And so at the end of every chapter, I list, here's 5 or 6 habits you can begin forming as counter liturgies, so that we are actually following God's heart instead of our own. And so something we do in the Williams home, and the table right behind me here, is on Mondays. My wife and I have 4 kids. On Mondays around the dinner table, we will do Magnificent Monday. We just go around, what's something magnificent about who God is? We will do Terrible Tuesdays. What's something terrible that we could lift up before a sovereign God? We do Wicked Wednesdays. Let's get honest with each other. What's something we've done that's sinful and falling short that we can bring to the cross of Jesus? We'll do Thankful Thursdays. What's something to express gratitude to God for? And then Freaked Out Fridays. What's something that maybe we're anxious about, that, again, we can bring before an enthroned God who runs the universe. And by habituating that, they're learning, on Wicked Wednesdays, that they actually are depraved and in need of grace, and their feelings should be questioned, and they aren't the moral authority in the universe. Magnificent Mondays, they're learning to be awestruck by something bigger than themselves. Thankful Thursdays, they're learning that they aren't entitled, but they should say thanks, because everything good, true, beautiful, and awesome is a gift of God. So, yeah, I would tell a room full of parents, a room full of youth pastors, a room full of leaders, it's not enough to just sort of say, boo, expressive individualism. Let's get to the work of solid biblical Christianity, living out as a counterculture, liturgies that show we revere God more than our own hearts.
It's really helpful. So you're actually suggesting that those ordinary daily moments in family life could actually make a difference.
Yeah, they can be revolutionary. Absolutely. Imagine that.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, that's marvelous.
Revolutions start around the dinner table, biblical revolutions.
Yes. Wow, that's good.
Well, it's been great to have you on the program, Thaddeus, and we do want to commend your book to our listeners. It's entitled Don't Follow Your Heart, Boldly Breaking the 10 Commandments of Self-Worship, with a beautiful picture of Thaddeus's daughter, Dutch, on the front. It also contains something we haven't mentioned, and that is that each chapter is accompanied by a kind of testimony from a Christian. Monique Dussault, who's been on this program, is one of them. Johnny, of course, who is well known to all of our listeners, is also one of those who contribute. So it's a very rich book. It's a very practical book. We certainly want to commend it to you, our listeners. And as Thaddeus himself said, the best thing you can do if you've got a problem in this life is go and buy his book.
And thanks to you, Carl, for writing the foreword to it. That was very generous.
That's okay. Yep, enjoy doing that. I have to say, the foreword is worth the price of the book.
I'm still in crippling debt for how much I had to pay you to get that. But, I'm doing
if you wish to visit our website.
I'm doing fine with one kidney. I had to sell one to pay for Truman's foreword. The website, www.jointheheretics.com.
There you go.
Jointheheretics.com. There's a promo video. There's all kinds of bonus content that can be unlocked. There's actually an album that I wrote and recorded that goes along with the book, sort of a soundtrack to it. There's all kinds of interviews and articles. So www.jointheheretics.com would be a good place.
Excellent. Thanks very much. Nice. We too have our own website, mortificationofspin.org. And if you choose to visit that, you can enter a draw and stand a chance to win a copy of Thaddeus's book. And if while you're visiting the website, you feel led to make a donation, please do so. Remember, we are a listener-supported podcast. And that just leaves me to thank you once again for joining us for this program. Thank our guest, Thaddeus Williams, and to say that we look forward to being with you all next time.
Thanks for listening to Mortification of Spin, a podcast of the Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals. For more on topics like this, visit mortificationofspin.org, where you can find other articles by Carl and Todd, browse the archive of past episodes, and make a donation. We'll talk to you next time on Mortification of Spin.